Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. Normally, we talk about ideas, philosophical concepts, and whatnot, but
Mhm.
today we're going to talk a little bit of pop culture. And we have the perfect guest to do that with us today. I mean, this guy's been a writer, a music reporter. He's on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame selection committee. I mean, he's been on MSNBC, he had his own show. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. Touré, welcome to the program.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. And I'm very happy to have you on because this was a nice surprise. I just happened to meet you. I was in New York for the Soho Forum debate. And my friend and I just ran into you in a store, and you've obliged me to come on the show, which is really, really good.
Thanks.
So you're a writer.
Yeah,
When did you first get into writing, and what was your motivation?
it's a great question. Part of what I think is that writing came easily to me. Like when I was in school, the high school, like ninth grade, even. I remember getting praised by a teacher in ninth grade for something I wrote, and I was like, that came out of me pretty easily. Like I enjoyed doing the assignment. The feeling of like, if you could get up to a very high running speed very quickly and easily, and you're like, oh, this high running speed is easy for me to reach. And she was kind of pointing that out, like, you did really good. And I was like, oh, if you think that was really good, like, because I reached that level very easily. And to sort of keep going. The thing I also remember is that my mom thought a lot about writers. I knew she held writers in high esteem. So I knew if I said to her, I want to be a writer, she would be like, great. I respect that. I like that. Toni Morrison was talked about in our house with, acclaim. That name was just said with reverence. Alice Walker's name was said with reverence. So I knew that sort of art was possible for me. And so where it really goes into higher gear, because I barely wrote for the high school newspaper. I remember writing for the high school newspaper, and I remember I used to hang out with the guys from the basketball team because I went to this private school near Boston. And like the cool older black guys were on the basketball team, and I would hang out with them. And they were dissing the coach. This is the varsity, the core of the varsity. And they were dissing the coach. Now the coach is the problem. So I wrote a review or recap of the game, which was supposed to be pretty pro forma. X, Y, and Z happened. And I sort of weaved in a notion of like, this is largely the coach's fault. And I remember like the principal was very upset. And I'm like, but if it's true, then why can't I say that? And it was the first time that I wrote something that really bothered somebody and like had a real reaction. It was like public, but I wasn't thinking about being a writer. I went to college. I went to Emory in Atlanta, and there was an incident that would like only matter to college students where the black students were hosting a party. It was supposed to contracted with campus police to go until, let's say, 12 a.m. And somebody supposedly called and complained. And so the party shut down at 11 p.m. instead of 12 a.m. And we were very, very upset about this. This is racism and this is repression. And so 20 of us who were, leaders in the community wrote letters to the school paper to say that this was wrong. And we thought like, well, if 20 people write letters, then they'll have to publish 20 letters and we'll have a big voice. Well, this paper did the right thing journalistically in that they saw that we were all basically saying the same thing. So they combined it into one letter with 20 names. But we didn't know that that was the thing to do journalistically. So we were like very offended. We felt very silenced. And so I took it on myself to create a newspaper that I then ran for 2.5 years, which was kind of like I spent more time doing that a lot of time than doing my schoolwork. It was called The Fire This Time. It was very nationalist. It was just, a lot of articles written by me and others talking about what was going on campus and nationally. And now I'm seeing people respond to my work. Like I wrote that like 2 days ago and you're reading it and you're like, I like it, I don't like it, whatever. And so then I started to feel like a writer. And in Atlanta, I started to think of myself as a writer. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to New York to see what's really good, to lay down my gauntlet to see if I can figure all this out. And I moved to New York and started trying to get on as a music writer.
The Fire this time, that's based on a book by James Baldwin, correct?
For sure.
So
For sure.
James Baldwin, of course, was a big, you sort of motorcycle going by outside. James Baldwin was a real cultural critic, right? And you at some point decided to write on culture. What were the cultural trends when you were first writing, say, for Rolling Stone? Like, where was the country headed at that point?
So hip hop was moving into a more serious, long-term national phase. In the 80s, hip hop was considered by others, not me. I was deeply into this culture the first time I heard Rapper's Delight. Yeah, I heard Rapper's Delight and I was like, oh my God, what is that? And I had to hear everything. So by the time I get out of college, I have been a very close student of what we generally called rap at that point, and just loved the culture and the stars and was just paying attention to all of it just purely as a fan. And, the 80s, it was very regional. And some people thought it was a fad. But by the 90s, it starts to become a more national thing. It's getting on television. It's getting on the radio all the time. It's becoming part of the firmament of American culture, even though it's still a small part of American culture. And, Rolling Stone magazine is like realizing like we have to have a response to this. We have to cover this. And they'd had a couple of white people doing some of the coverage. But then I'm this intern who's kind of in everybody's face and like, hey, I love hip hop and I want to write for the magazine and what's going on? And interns were not supposed to become writers, but I suddenly kind of was in everybody's office and like chatting them up and like, what do you think? How do you become a writer? And eventually somebody gave me a little tiny, like 300-word record review. And I worked super freaking hard on that. And he really liked it. And he gave me another and another. And then they were like, oh, he's really good at writing about hip hop. And then they asked me to go interview Run DMC, and they were on their Down with the King album. So this is like late comeback era Run DMC, right? So like this group that I had loved from their inception, and they had this rise, and now I'm like, okay, I listened to everything that I could, even though I already knew it. I super studied for the interview. I remember I got the three of them in a conference room and we had the most raucous, fun conversation. That was like bing, 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 and like talking all three of them and really Run and D and like really getting a great story and how they felt about things. And at like 60 minutes, the publicist said, okay, that's it. And Run stood up and he said, dope interview. And he walked out and I was like, oh my God. And then I wrote the article and I ran into him at the Apollo and he was like, that was a dope article. You couldn't tell me nothing after that. I knew that I was good at this and I was off to the races. And I wasn't even questioning whether or not I was good at it, but he recognized it. And I was like, well, if he liked my interview and he liked my article about him, like, I'm in the right place. And then I just stayed at Rolling Stone, moving up, doing features into covers. And out of that, they started putting me out for TV gigs, go on MSNBC a little bit and talk about this, go on CNN a little bit and talk about this. And then those places liked the way I showed up there and they started calling me back. And that sort of launched me into TV.
So I'm probably going to surprise some of my listeners here, but as a little kid, I think I must have been 7 or 8. I don't know, but breakdancing became very popular. Break In 1 and 2, you know, Break Into Electric Boogaloo, and
Crush Groove.
Turbo and Ozone, you know, and Ice-T was in the movie. And, you know, my friends and I, young age, we start listening into rap music. Then rap kind of changed from, you know, you had the Fat Boys and Grandmaster Flash and whatnot. And then Ice-T and NWA and some of the gangster rap stuff. Now, flash forward a little bit to when I'm incarcerated, and I had listened to, you know, a lot of that stuff. But as I got older, my music taste, I didn't like the newer rap. I still, even today, you could put on NWA and I like it, but the newer stuff I didn't really follow. But in prison, the people that I associated with, we were like all races, right? And we were the people in prison that like to learn, and not everybody in there, surprisingly, I know, likes to study, likes to learn. And we would have debates, and we were not the politically correct type, right? So we don't care, right? Like one of my best friends, you know, he says things to me and I say things to him that probably would get us both canceled forever. You know, real good guy. But the honesty of debates is what mattered. And recently somebody asked me a question in an interview, and now I'm going to ask you about it. Okay. One of my contentions was, when we would discuss, for instance, crime in inner cities or black on black crime, and I would say it has nothing to do with race. Race is not the issue. I said, but there is a problem with, I don't know if I want to call it a subset, but with an element of hip hop culture. And what I mean by that is the elements where women are referred to as bitches, for instance, and hoes, and, you know, NWA, reach back like a pimp, smack the hoe, and stuff like that is, I believe, very toxic. So that would be my position in the debates with the guys in prison. I'm just curious what you think about it as somebody who's been enmeshed in the rap, you know, industry since Run DMC.
Well, you touch on a bunch of things there. I mean, for one thing, would you talk about white on white crime? Probably not. I don't know why not.
I don't either.
I think a lot of crime happens really in terms of proximity, right? Like we tend to rob people who live relatively near us, not on our block, but somewhere that's not far, right? Like we don't tend to.
Well, we don't rob them, right?
Not you and I, but human beings who do this they don't tend to go far away, right? Some do, but they don't tend to go. They tend to live, right? So you tend to rob people who are around you, right? Yeah. So I don't look at like that sort of crime, you know, or drug sales really as like black on black crime. You are in your neighborhood trying to make money. Right now, this is an illegal attempt, but like that's what you're doing. I think that hip hop is definitely part of the street world, and the street world is part of hip hop, but they're not necessarily the same. And I actually think that the abdication of violence in New York was critical to New York creating hip hop. I don't know if you know the whole story. In the early 70s, in the Bronx, New York had a very serious gang culture, to where, you know, if you're in one of the many gangs, 40, 50, 60 gangs, we had something like that, you know, thousands of members, that you know, you couldn't go in certain blocks. You couldn't walk on that block because that was their block, and we're in this gang, that sort of shit. And there was, I'm going to truncate the story. There was an incident where one of the ministers of peace of one of the gangs was murdered, and instead of revenge, the leaders called every gang member in the city together to a meeting. And there's video, at least, of this meeting. This is real. Where they called a citywide truce, and they basically ended the gang warfare as it had been. And suddenly, people are able to go pretty much wherever they want. You can't fly your colors, but like you can go to this block and that block. And when that starts to happen, people start to find each other who are like the creative people, right? They start to come out. They start to have parties. Soon after this, Cool Herc's party happens, right? We mark that as the beginning of hip hop, but like parties like that are happening around that time and after that lead to what we now know as rap culture. But if the gangs had not receded there in the early 70s, we would not have this at all in this way.
So what do you think? You mentioned drugs, and I just want to ask you this as a kind of an aside, but it is relevant. What do you think on the war on drugs? And just to tip my hand, I'm vehemently opposed to it. I think it's an abomination. I think that it's an attack on freedom and
I think
everything
that
else.
part of why I wanted to do this interview is because I sensed that about you without you even fully saying it. Like knowing just a little bit about your background, I knew we would be in the same place on the war on drugs. This is one of the most destructive things that has happened to America in recent American history. The war on drugs has been far more destructive than drugs have been.
Absolutely.
And the notion that we could police or militarize our way out of a drug issue was always silly. I've read a bunch of the work of Johann Hari, who did an amazing book about the war on drugs in America. And of course, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is just amazing, iconic, and canonical. The way that we thought we could defeat drugs almost makes you think like that they didn't really want to defeat it. They wanted to have a permanent enemy so that they could continue getting money for police, courts, politicians, right, who are increasingly saying, I'm going to be tough on crime, building prisons. The notion that we are allowing private individuals to profit on incarcerating people is insane. I don't really like the whole notion of the state incarcerating people, but I kind of accept that as an evil that the society has decided we have to have, right? I'm much more in my heart with the prison abolitionists, but if we're going to be having this repressive war on drugs, it was never intended. If we're going to have people profiting from incarcerating people, then of course you would have corruption in who gets incarcerated and how fast and how often. And the only way, and we're starting to see this, I think, the only way to actually have an impact on drugs in America would be to legalize drugs in America, which is sort of the inverse of the war on drugs. Like, instead of saying, you can't have it and we will send the police after you if you have even a small amount of it, it's like, no, go ahead, have as much as you want. So that ends the violence around the situation. Yeah. I mean, Europe figured this out a while ago. Only American Puritanism kept us, and the amount of money that we were profiting from the war on drugs kept us from an actual solution, which was legalization, which has not ruined the country at all.
No. It's a couple of things. One is, you mentioned Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Just to tell you, and as an aside, and maybe we can discuss it later, I read it and I thought she was wrong on virtually everything. Like, it's too much. It's like, I went through that book with a fine-tooth comb because it was a challenge. Like I said, in prison, we challenge one another. Here, read this. This is what you would disagree with. Read it. Tell me what you could argue against. So I went and did it. But I've got like 12 more minutes with you. But I just wanted to let you know my thoughts on that. On prison reform, it's interesting because I kind of agree with you, but I think there's a problem. One, there's way too many people incarcerated, and that's largely driven by the war on drugs. Not just drug crimes, meaning drug dealers and drug buyers, but the fact that somebody that's a heroin addict, for instance, the cost is so prohibitive because of the illegality that person now is boosting on a regular basis in order to support their habit. Whereas an alcoholic can return tin cans. Yeah, I mean, the Coke soda cans.
As Michelle Alexander points out, in an illegal economy, they will sell to children. In a legalized, regulated economy, like alcohol, they won't sell to children because
Yes.
there's a massive penalty that can be enacted, but you can't
Yes.
penalize the drug dealers in the corner who are already risking their freedom by
Yeah.
being there.
Right. They don't, and they also cut it with all kinds of garbage. But if you got rid of that, you would get rid of a lot of the gang wars. I mean, we haven't learned our lesson from Prohibition, right? You had the same exact thing: impurities in the alcohol, mobsters having gang fights for territory and for control of the Prohibition market. It's no different in principle than what we have now. So if you were to get rid of that, the prison population would be decreased massively from the start. But on private prisons, I actually think a little differently.
Okay.
And this is why. The private prisons in America, the way that they run they're paid per body that they house, right?
Okay.
So that means that the incentive is to keep people there. You don't want to rehabilitate people. And it doesn't even have to be some nefarious intent. Human beings respond to incentives, right? That in the incentive structure.
But think bigger.
Backwards.
Think bigger. How do we get more people in there?
Well, that can happen. Yeah, you create more laws.
Yeah, every business wants more clients, more customers.
Yes.
So this business is getting more customers means making more things illegal and arresting more people.
You mentioned prison abolitionists. Have you heard of Baz Dreisinger by any chance?
I don't think so.
So she wrote a book called Incarceration Nations, and she's a prison abolitionist, and I disagree with her vehemently on prison abolition. But it was a very good book. She went around the world to different countries and saw how they run their correctional systems. And when she was in Australia, she came across a private prison system run by a company called Serco. They're based in the United Kingdom. The way that now in America, remember I said that they get reimbursed based on how many people they house. The way Serco does it is they base part of their employment structure based on drops in recidivism. So the incentive is actually to rehabilitate the inmates. Otherwise, you're not getting paid. You get paid for the result of actually getting the inmates to be responsible members of the community. To me, that is a far better approach than the warehousing approach that we take in America in both public and private.
You are not in favor of abolition.
No.
So you think that prison does have a place in society?
I think that, I think there's some people, I think I was one of them, and some people forever, but that need to be removed from society. Because
really?
There was no way.
Hold on. Do you, America incarcerates, right, more people than any other country in the world, right?
Yes. Well, I don't know about per capita. You might be right. I'm not sure.
I think it's per capita. I think per capita.
You might be right. It might just be developed nations, but way too many people. I'll just agree with that.
Well, that's the question, because you say some people need to be locked away. Let's stipulate, Charles Manson, for whatever reason, cannot live in society. Fine.
Yes.
How many Charles Mansons are there? Like if we are incarcerating, I don't know what number it is, 3-4 million people, something like that.
Last time I knew it was 2. I'm not sure what it is.
2 million total.
It's way
All right,
too
let's
many
go with that for now. I mean, if there's even if there's 1,000 people who cannot be in regular society, I mean, is it close to 2 million people? I think we're vastly overusing the system.
I agree with you 100%. Maybe you just mean something different. When I hear abolition, I mean no prisons at all.
I think society in general would be better, and I don't think this a society as advanced as America would ever even try this, but like society would be better with no incarceration, given that incarceration itself causes problems. Non-incarceration causes some problems, but incarceration is also causing some. So there's a trade-off either way. It's not just if we lock them up, we'll have safety, which we don't. Or if we don't lock them up, then we'll have the purge, which we won't.
This is an interesting thing, especially for me, because I actually co-authored a book called Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime. So the problem is, I agree with your points. What I disagree with is I think that there could be a functioning correctional system. I think that it would house far less people. But I'm talking in terms of oughts, right? What I think should be. As is, the United States of America incarcerates far too many people.
Yes.
The prison system, from my personal experience and from what I've looked into it in other states and other localities, it's indifferent, incompetent,
Yes.
sometimes malicious. But in my experience, there's far more indifference and incompetence than there is malice.
Is it not traumatizing to go to prison?
Not to the degree that people think, right? I mean, you get deprived of your liberty and it sucks. Nobody, I can't deny that, right?
I mean, we lose our liberty for 3 seconds walking through TSA and we freak out.
Right. But you have the expectation in that scenario that you're going to be free.
No, I know. I'm saying if I had no expectation, I'm being in this situation for 3 years, 5, whatever.
The problem here is that the human beings have an amazing ability to adapt to circumstances. And you'd be surprised. I remember like my first day in prison, and I thought there is no fucking way I can do this. I thought I might get 5 years. The idea that I was going to spend the next 25 years in prison didn't even enter my mind. I thought 5 years, and I thought there is no way I'm doing this. I can't do this. This is insane. I can't do it. Very quickly, though, you become acclimated to it. And it becomes your life. Every day you wake up, you go to your job, you take your shower, you talk to your friends in the block, whatever you get in this, you watch your TV, you read your books. Very quickly. It still sucks. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's like this fun house, but it's not as traumatizing as it could be. Now, granted, there might be some prisons where, stabbings are rampant and sexual assaults are happening every day, where I would say, well, no, that would be traumatizing. But in my experience, from where I've been and what I've read about, that's not the word that I would use. I wouldn't say traumatizing.
Wow. Okay.
But see these are I would love to be able to sit with you for 3 hours and talk and debate these issues, because I think that you and I would disagree on a lot, but then agree on a lot. You know what I mean? And I think it would be very, in my experience, those discussions are very fruitful.
I think that prison, see, you don't want to go with traumatizing, but I think it has a significantly negative impact on a lot of people's lives. Prison itself.
Well, here's the problem. Let me tell you.
And wait, hold on. What I want to do for society, as far as looking forward, can we make it much harder to incarcerate somebody who is nonviolent?
Oh, I'm with you 100%.
Yep. So that we're, violent crimes are a whole different level of interpersonal interaction. But nonviolent, I want fewer people and families broken up. The thing that comes back to me is that prison is a difficult place, and most of the people who go to prison will come back.
95%.
And they will bring the problems and the traumas that they experience in prison back to their communities.
The problem is they had those. Now, I'm talking about violent offenders. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about some kid who he's hungry, so he's selling reefer on the corner. I'm talking about people that stab, shoot people, rob people, that sort of thing.
That's horrible.
Right. It is. So they were already doing that pre-prison, right? So the prison is not making them worse. It's not helping. It's not rehabilitating them. But you could have somebody, I would agree, low-level drug dealer goes to prison and ends up worse than he was before he went. That's why I think one of the reasons, anyway, we need to end this abomination called the war on drugs.
I mean, I think it was very important to have we really moved on from the war on drugs? I think we're no. I mean, it's sort of
Trump wants to ramp it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it felt like it was scaling down a tiny bit, but it's not, but it's almost becomes like just part of the culture of America. Like it's not like an active thing we have to do. Like this is what we do. And, as far as our
Yeah.
relationship to Mexico and whatever. And, but
A
the
big
legalization has
full
made it
legalization.
harder to make a profit on the underground market, which makes the risk no longer worth it.
Right. And I think full legalization. And I think a big problem is, and I use my own family as what I think is a big problem. My grandmother was a raging alcoholic who took over the counter tranquilizers, benzodiazepines, Ativan. My mother was a heroin addict, right? In principle, there's no difference between the two. But my grandmother looked down on my mother for being a heroin addict. And I think that's how most people look at it, right? Most people accept alcohol. They want to drink and they see nothing wrong with it, but they look at heroin and say, oh, that icky heroin. Personally, I don't recommend either, but people should be able to do it.
God, who's the brother? Who's the brother who talked about drugs a lot? Who's up at Columbia? God, I interviewed him. He was a really brilliant guy. He wrote a book about microdosing on heavy level shit like heroin all the time. God, I can't remember his name. I don't remember his name.
Not Timothy Leary.
No. This is a black guy, much later than Leary. This is like a black guy in the last 15 years who's known for, like, he takes drugs and he writes very seriously and thoughtfully about drugs. Anyway, I think that I would want to check this with doctors, obviously, but I suspect that the addictive potential of heroin, cocaine, is perhaps too much to say to the public of 350 some million people in America. Go ahead, do whatever you want, figure it out. But marijuana is not. So if we want to maintain a prohibition on cocaine and heroin, I support that. The prohibition on marijuana is now piecemeal, right? You could buy it legally here, but not there. That's kind of weird. Is it legal or not? States are not clear. As a nation, we're not sure. Would like to see legalization. I'm not sure if or when we'd see it. We'd have to see a profit motive, like a company or a group of companies that could say to America or a given state, we will give you, a significant amount of tax revenue. And then people would be into it. But it makes me wonder if the tax revenue that's being collected by a Colorado or whatever is at a rate where it doesn't move the needle such that, Nebraska or Tennessee would be willing to legalize.
Yeah, but the problem is that it's not really legalized, right? They select who can sell it, where they can sell it. It's regulated to the hilt, so that allows the black
So with
market.
alcohol sales, you can't go sell alcohol.
Yeah,
today.
but it's not to the same degree. But I just wanted you to check on some stuff, right? Alcohol, more people die from alcohol-related deaths than they do from heroin-related deaths, right? If you put side by side,
yes, but that's not what I was saying.
No, you're not. I'm telling you why alcohol is just as bad, if not worse. Put them side by side and look at the bodily effects. Alcohol, heroin, alcohol, cocaine. Alcohol's way worse.
The thing that I would look at, the only statistic that I would really care about is the addictive potential on an average person. And I believe, being a non-scientist, but just from the little I've picked up, that I believe heroin and cocaine would be more magnetic to an average person than alcohol. More people can drink and spend their money on alcohol and not go too far, right? Versus,
well, how do we know that though, right? Heroin's illegal. So the only people likely to be doing it are addicts, right? If it's legal, you're probably going to have far more recreational users. I don't know about the psychological addictions.
The addicts, I don't know.
You can die from alcohol withdrawal. You can't from heroin withdrawal.
Addict means a problem user. you don't think that there's plenty of people who are not problem users who can regulate their use? I mean, the 80s was filled with professionals doing cocaine. Lots of
Yeah,
people knew how to do just enough cocaine so they could continue to do their, I mean, obviously lots of ODs, right? But there was a large class of people who like knew how to do cocaine and continue to do their job and be a productive member of society. And I think that's probably pretty hard to do because I don't really see that much of that anymore. Um, I do believe that there are certain substances that are too powerful for the average person to just be able to acquire, just for their own ability to continue to. The whole thing is about helping people continue to be productive citizens. So alcohol allows that to happen. If they spiral off and become a heroin addict, they don't.
that's only because it's illegal. If it were legal, that wouldn't be the case.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know about
Well, that I definitely want to have this conversation at a later date. I don't want to. You've already given me 5 more minutes than what we agreed to, and I appreciate it so much. I'm just hoping you'll answer 2 questions for me before
Okay,
you
go
go.
ahead.
One is from my friend Subby. He told me to ask you, who's your favorite rapper all time? Subby's been into hip hop, like going back to Sugar Hill Gang.
My
He loves
favorite
classic
is
hip hop.
probably Jay-Z,
How
who's
about classic hip hop, 80s, let's say.
um, from the 80s. I mean, so many. I mean, KRS-One is just such an important figure in hip hop and in my life. I spent a few years working with him on his autobiography, and it didn't come out, but it was still an extraordinary time in my life. I traveled through Europe with him on his tour, working on this book, and just got to know the whole family and you know people who aren't here anymore, and like it was extraordinary career and extraordinary to understand the full scope of it.
That is awesome. Okay, last question. Diddy, is he going to get found guilty or not guilty?
Yeah. I think the government, which, as I'm sure you know, the federal government, something like wins like 95% of the time, something like that, 97% of the time, something
It's a lot.
ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
I'm following the case very closely. I definitely see them making the connection of here's a person in his business who is helping him commit crime. Here's another person in his business who's helping him commit crime. And that's racketeering.
All right. I think you're probably correct. Touré, thank you so much, man, for coming on the show. I appreciate it so much. Where can people find you? Besides everywhere.
I mean, I make a lot of YouTubes at Touré Tube. I do a show about hip hop called Rap Latte. I'm on a show called Truth Talks. All that's on YouTube. Check out my TikToks. It's fun.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, bro.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.